Hi everybody, now for a change of pace. This does also involve money, but in a different way. And I'm also going to include this video in with a new playlist that I want to start. It's, restaurant reviews for this year for 2012. So, for those of you that were wondering what the holdup was, Tony and I, needed to pick a restaurant and eat at it, and then not this video or the next video, but the video, like 2 videos from now, I'm going to do a restaurant update if I don't change my mind and do it in the next video. But in this video, I'm going to talk about something to do with restaurants too. That's why it's going in the 2012 restaurant list playlist for restaurant reviews. Well, this is another, I saw this on Yahoo kind of thing. And this one, I expect to pretty much, really cause a debate and stuff, because, 2 years ago, my one restaurant review, which shall remain nameless, it's one of my more popular videos on this channel, set off like a maelstrom of, people bitching about everything. This one is something that's also related to some other videos that I've talked about before in the past. So, I want to probably even include this one, make up a playlist of all my videos that talk about this, and put this in that playlist too. But this article is called, "Are You Tipping Correctly?" This was actually something I saw back on January the 5th. So, I've kind of had this for over a month and been sitting on it because I forgot to do it until tonight and I thought about it. Okay, like I said, I'm going to read, like in the latest video, but this article, I'm going to read it pretty much verbatim. So I'm not plagiarizing or anything, I'm just reading this article. But here's what they have to say. Well, most of us agree that 20% or close to it is the standard amount to leave on a restaurant check. Other tipping related matters leave us scratching our heads. To settle these debates once and for all, Steve DeBlanca, former senior author of the blog Waiter Rant and recent book Keep the Change, A Clueless Tipper's Quest to Becoming the Guru of Gratuity, weighs in on some hot topic issues. 1. Should you tip on the tax? On one hand, there's no reason to tip on the tax. The restaurant doesn't keep tax money. When the gratuity is automatically included on a check for a large party, it's pre-tax. Added pre-tax. On the other, when most servers total their sales at the end of the night, they include the tax and the amount. This sorting out amount determines how much tip they tip out to busboys, runners, and other staff members. By not tipping on the tax, stiffing them out of their fair share. You're stiffing them out of their fair share. Parts of the words are missing on this, so you have to kind of bear with me. Steve's verdict. I like it when you do, but you don't have to tip on the tax. 2. What is the correct amount to tip on drinks? On one hand, 20% is way too much. It's just a drink. The standard in most bars is $1 for each beverage poured, or percent, which generally adds up to $1. Bartenders are tipped by other members of staff, so they are walking around with plenty of money. On the other hand, bartenders do more work than servers because they're the ones actually making the drinks, not the servers. They deserve the full 20%. Steve's verdict. At the bar, you should leave 15 to 20% of the cost of that drink. It may seem kind of ridiculous. Look at it this way. At the table, you're paying 15 to 20%. Why does the bartender not get nothing, but the waiter does? Who doesn't make those drinks? Who does? 3. Do you always tip your barista? On one hand, yes. They're skilled workers and deserve tips just as much as other food service employees. On the other, baristas make a decent hourly wage, unlike servers, and they don't work for tips. Besides, what's the point in tipping them if they don't see you put the money in a jar? Steve's verdict. I learned when I worked as a barista that if you get a cup of coffee and give us the change from that cup, we're really grateful. But I've seen people order one of those frothy ice milk latte chemistry experiments, which can be more complicated to prepare than a martini, and then not tip. For baristas who make you one of those, tip $1. Number 4, when, if ever, is it acceptable to leave a bad tip? On one hand, never. Even if your server really, really screws up, the tip money is being distributed to multiple employees of the restaurant. If you're unhappy with your server, it is not fair to penalize the busboy, bartender, food runners, and other employees who depend on this money to make their living. On the other, it's okay to leave a bad tip if you receive bad service. It should raise the customer, and it will send a message of displeasure to the restaurant. Steve's verdict: I don't suggest stiffing servers on the tip because you're punishing all the other people connected on the food chain. I tell people to talk to the manager and say, I had very poor service, but I'm leaving a tip anyway. Okay, number 5. Should a server be able to automatically include gratuity if it's not a large group? On one hand, yes, in certain cases. Many tourists from other countries don't understand the tipping protocol in the States. Servers have a right to protect themselves. On the other, it's outrageous for a server to include the tip unless it's a large group. Legally, servers don't have the right to make the customer pay any gratuity. Steve's right. If you were to include a service charge automatically, you would have to tell everyone who walks in the door you're adding a 20% service charge. I don't support waiters deciding who they're going to attach a tip to. That's not their job. That's management's job, and they need to have a very well thought out policy about why they're doing that. Well, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and talk about all 5 of these questions individually and my take on them. You know, on the first one, should you tip on the tax? The answer is I typically take whatever like the total is. Like for example, I have a receipt here from BW3s. We'll just use them as an example. I tip on the tax. It's like I take whatever, you know, like, you know, like for example, the amount was $43.52 here. This was a while back. You know, and I just, you know, I'm one of those weird tippers. I can't remember if the service was okay this night or not, but it was okay enough for me to, you know, make it a $49 total charge. So, but, you know, that said, that's what I tip. I'm one of the few people that I'm a weird tipper. I mean, like, I will tip very weirdly. Like, what it is like, I will tip where it'll end up as, you know, here, you know, it ends up making it an even dollar amount for me. It's just because, you know, like, if, like, say this card, not to say that it was, but, you know, say for example, you know, this was attached to my checking account, the card that I used on here. You know, if it was attached to my checking account, that just makes it easier for me to, you know, compute if I don't have to figure in, you know, like, you know, 52 something and 52 or something. You know, I just, you know, it's easier to do, you know, the whole dollar amount because it's, you know, saves me some time. But, you know, as far as, you know, that goes, I mean, you know, I just say use your discretion on it, but, you know, it's your call. You know, what is the correct amount to tip on drinks? I tip on drinks only if I'm like at the bar doing it and like I pay for the drink outright, you know, at the bar with the bartender. I mean, I will do that. I mean, it just depends on my take on that is it depends on the situation. You know, if I'm getting it at the bar, then I'll tip the bartender. If I'm getting it from the wait staff, you know, it'll be figured in with, you know, the total. Do you always tip your barista? I don't drink that much coffee, you know, I mean, like, I'm more of a tea drinker. And I don't go to, like, Starbucks and get those, you know, fancy food drinks. You know, I could spend the rest of my life not drinking coffee. You know, but, I mean, it's like if I go in there and I have the extra money, you know, yeah, I'll, you know, tip them. You know, especially if I have, like, extra change and I want to lighten my pocket up. Number 4, my personal favorite. This one, I gotta tell you, I have gotten more comments on, you know, the videos where I was talking about the couple that didn't leave the tip. You know, that's one of the videos I was referring to at the beginning of this video. You know, because I did earlier shoot a bunch of videos talking about the couple that didn't do tips, and you don't believe how many comments I got on it. I mean, it's people, you know, on both videos were gabbing about that. I mean, it's, you know, on both sides of the fence. Well, my opinion is, and, you know, this is kind of borrowing something from Garrison Keillor, who I'm going to talk about in length later, just because Richard needs to hear my take on Garrison Keillor. Because I have a couple of videos that, you know, about Garrison Keillor on this channel, and Richard, you're going to love my take on the man. But as far as, back to number 4, when, if ever, is it acceptable to leave a bad tip? Matter of fact, speaking of Richard, he and I have talked about this, and he and I are in agreement about this. There are times when, yeah, it's acceptable to leave a bad tip. For example, that video that I talked about earlier, the one that, you know, back in 2010 was like way popular, that I'm not going to name. I didn't leave a tip for the waiter just because the waiter had a piss poor attitude towards us, to be honest. And, you know, yeah, I will not tip if I think the waiter gave crap service, you know, and the rest of the wait staff. I mean, like, for example, like, I will cut the wait staff a break. Like, I have factors that I figure in. Like, if, for example, say the restaurant was, like, insanely busy, you know, if they were, like, insanely busy and, you know, the waiter or waitress was just hauling butt, like, for example, if you pay attention to my rehash of the 2011 restaurants, I talk about Tony and I having gone to Red Lobster New Year's Eve, and I did a restaurant review of the Ohio Pike Red Lobster over in Cincinnati. For example, our little waitress, God bless her, she ran her buns off and did a great job. I actually got the manager and said, listen, this girl needs a pay raise. She rocks. She's awesome. You know, and I bragged on her. Excuse me. We left her a really good tip. I don't remember what the total ended up being offhand, but we did leave her a very good tip. Now, that's a good tip. A bad tip would be like what happened with that restaurant that I'm not going to talk about her name here because that's rehashing something that, you know, I don't need to go on about. But, you know, I don't think we tipped him at all. But, you know, as Garrison Keillor says in my Ethics of Jokes video, and you should watch it, he talks about outcome-based morality. You know, I do recommend you watch that video. But anyway, it's outcome-based tipping. Outcome-based tipping is if, you know, the outcome of how everything worked, you know, if it sucked, you know, if the waiter was just like, to us, you know, I mean, without saying it, you know, if he or she just, you know, had their head up their butt and was dead as a doornail, and they just acted like nobody was sitting at our table, you know, that we weren't there, you know, and when he or she came over to us and waited on us, he acted like we were putting them out, you know, we're not going to tip very good. And I'm not saying that to be cruel, it's just, you know, we do. But, you know, if, like, say, management was to come over and say, you know, how was your service? I'd look right at them and say, you know something? This is some of the worst service I've ever had, you know. And I won't say, you know, like it's suggested here in this article, you know, but we're going to leave a tip anyway. I go, I'm not going to tell them that. I mean, I'm going to leave that detail out, you know. One of my favorite stories, and this involves, you know, tipping. This actually happened to us. It happened to me twice. Both times was with my parents, which is absolutely hysterical. If you know, the sibling that this involves watches this, or the spouse of that sibling watches this, you know, it's pretty funny. Several years ago, I'd say I was a teenager. I was maybe 14 or 15. I wasn't old enough to drive. So, you know, I was 15 at the oldest, but I was definitely a teenager. My parents took my siblings and I to the TGI Fridays on Turkey Foot out in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. Well, back then they had pizza on the menu. well, I ordered a pizza, no big deal. And we'd waited like a really long time. And it's like everybody else, you know, that came in after us got seated, got the food, ate, and left, and we're still sitting there. Had never got our food. We sat there and waited, I'd say, for a good 45 minutes to an hour. This is the first time, of course. What ended up happening is they burned my food. And while they were waiting for the kitchen to finish fixing it, they, you know, everybody else's food, my parents' food, and the rest of the family's food got cold. So they were remaking everything. We ended up getting it for free. True story, really happened. It was funny. Second time happened since I've been married. It happened at this O'Charlie's here in Cold Spring. What happened is it was my parents, again, and my mother-in-law, me, and my husband. Well, we were there at this O'Charlie's here, and I ordered fish. I eat a lot of seafood, just for the record. You know, I will eat seafood until the wheels come off. I will also eat beef, like pork. But I'm not a big fan of chicken. You know, my mother, that's a whole story about my mother got in a chicken rut and made chicken like so much that, you know, I'm surprised I'm not clucking and laying eggs. It just did something to me. Mom gave me an aversion of chicken. Okay, she had chickened me out, seriously. No offense against my mom, it's just, you know, I eat lots of seafood, beef and pork. But when I go out, I'll either eat, like, lately I've eaten a whole bunch of seafood. You know, I eat lots of it. But anyway, that said, we were there. I had ordered a cedar plank salmon, which they have on the menu. Absolutely love it. You know, it's, you know, grilled. You know, flame grilled and stuff, just because fish is good for you. You know, especially when it's grilled and, you know, baked or whatever with no, like, that breading on it. Well, what happened is the plank that they, you know, cooked it on, some goober didn't, you know, soak the plank long enough and, well, burned my fish. We ended up getting it again for free. I've talked about this in previous videos, but it was so funny. My parents looked at me and said, "What is with you? That's the second time that happened." And we got the biggest laugh off of that, and we told the Friday story to my mother-in-law. She said, "Good Lord." But anyway, as far as like the bad tip, like on those two occasions, we left, you know, a decent tip. I mean, granted, that wasn't the server's fault that the kitchen screwed up, and we weren't going to take it out on them. For example, you know, but really, I mean, bad tips, and I've also mentioned this before, Tony, my mom, and I all ate at Clauda's up here at the levee before Tony and I were married. I'd say it was in 2003 or 2004. We were dating at the time. I can't remember if we were, I don't believe we were engaged, but we were serious. We were very serious. But what happened is the waitress pressured us into getting a chocolate cake. She ended up screwing herself out of a tip. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that to be mean, but we had, between the three of us, we had just enough money to pay for all of our meals and a not so large tip, you know. So she, you know, forced us to get that, you know, cake. She pressured us into it, and in doing so, screwed herself out of a tip. I'm not saying that to be mean. Like I said, she did, you know. We just snuck out and left after we paid. We're like, well, you know, we paid cash and didn't tip her. And speaking of tips, on here, and this is just, you know, like a protection kind of thing, before I go on to number 5, and this is a lesson I told my mom about, and it goes back to bad tipping. My mom was going to actually leave like a cash tip for the waitress at, matter of fact, this O'Charlie's down here. And I told Mom, I said, what you ought to do, let me find that receipt again, you know, just because it makes it easier for me to show it. Okay, you know how, like, on here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's like, you know how there's like the line that says you owe this amount, and then there's a spot for a tip, and, you know, the amount at the bottom where you write down like the total. Well, like I said, Mom paid cash tip and left that part blank, left these two lines blank, and I said to her, I said, Mom, you ought to put a squiggly line through the middle one, the middle line where it says tip, and then write the top number down here where it says total, or, you know, there's going to be a problem. Well, what wound up happening is Mom just didn't even bother to do that. She just signed and went on. Well, a few days later, my mom, and it was that charge was actually attached to her debit card. What wound up happening is her bank, she ended up, like the O'Charlie's, I think it was O'Charlie's. Yeah, it was. She learned a lesson. She ended up where it was like, say the thing was, for her meal, it was like, you know, $20, tax and all. Well, it ended up being a $40 charge on her debit card. Mom, of course, didn't authorize that. Apparently, the waiter that waited on us that day went in and tacked on an extra $20 to that charge, and it went through. Well, Mom called the bank and disputed it and said, I didn't authorize, you know, that amount to be put through. I mean, that's, you know, theft, you know, of, you know, it's, on the one hand, it's theft of services, but, you know, it's theft because, you know, Mom didn't authorize the guy to do that. But, you know, that kind of stuff, as far as like tipping goes, that ties into this. You know, if you're going to pay, and this is a lesson my mom learned the hard way, and I was smart enough to know, I just knew that they could, you know, just up and do that, because it's just, you know, I've actually seen a waiter there, not at O'Charlie's, mind you. I'm not saying the wait staff there is guilty of that, but I have seen it happen at another restaurant, where I saw the waiter actually go in and do this, and they actually have talked about it on the news, too, just as an aside. So it's like, after that, like if I was going to say not leave a tip at all just because the service was, you know, crappy, I mean, like I would, and that goes in with this, you know, I put like the squiggly line there if I paid with like a credit card or something, and then write down the amount there. Of course, after that, my mom, it's so funny, we were at that O'Charlie's, matter of fact, I think it was the time that they burned our food, burned my fish. You know, Mom told my mother-in-law, you know, make sure you put down, you know, the squiggly line there, and I did, you know, on the one thing, and just write down the number down at the bottom, you know, because this had happened since then. But, you know, I mean, that's, you know, how I really feel, you know, even if the service was good, you know, and you decide to, you know, hey, pay cash, you know, make sure you write that all down, you know, for them, spell it out for them. Now, on number 5, should a server be able to automatically include gratuity if it's not a large group? Give me a second here, because I actually have an example of where there is a restaurant around here that does slap on a gratuity, and I've talked about it. It's actually Aladdin. Aladdin is the one restaurant that I know of, and it doesn't have it in here in their menu, but it's like on their take-home menu, but it does actually have it on their like regular eat-in menu. It says it like right at the bottom, like if, you know, say you're looking at this menu is pretty much identical, you know, for example, of what their menu in the restaurant looks like, but like right down here, like at the bottom, you know, the page in the middle, it says, you know, all groups get a 10% gratuity added on. You know, because the question is should a server be able to automatically include a gratuity if it's not a large group? You know, this is the only restaurant, Aladdin, that I know of for sure that does it. Doesn't matter the size of the group. It could be one person, it could be 100. That place does get rather packed. But yeah, they actually do. Most places don't, like for example, O'Charlie's, you know, or like Red Lobster or Longhorns, or the big name chain restaurants. They actually do not add on, you know, a gratuity unless it's 8 or more people. And it actually says it, like if you look at, you know, like the bottom of the receipt, the good old BW3, like it'll actually say it like down here at the bottom, you know, 20% gratuity tacked on to all parties, 8 or more. For example, one place that I've eaten at a few times, and I've actually had the 20% gratuity tacked on to my bill, is the Golden Lamb up in Lebanon, Ohio. Tony and I have actually stayed the night there, which it was an experience and a half, which I'll go into later. But the food's awesome. But you know, the first time I ever ate there was with a singles group. That same singles group I told the Halloween story on. You know, we all went up there and ate. there was, I'd say, about 20 of us, or more, 20, there was at least 20 of us there. And they slapped on the 20% gratuity. Their food's expensive to begin with, but, you know, it's like the whole thing, like, I went, like, as cheap as possible, and I think the cheapest thing on the menu was, like, $8 or something at the time. You know, I think, and I ordered water to drink. I think the whole thing ended up costing me, tax, tip, and everything, $20. And all I ordered was like a $9 meal, and the whole thing, tip and everything, cost me $20. I'm serious. You know, and you also have to keep in mind, and this is something to remind Richard of, Ohio has higher sales tax than Kentucky does. Kentucky has 6% sales tax. Ohio, especially over in Cincinnati, it's 6.5%, 7%, I think. It's not as expensive as Tennessee's. Tennessee's is a whopping 9%, 8.5%, 9%, something like that. You know, so it just makes me glad I live in Kentucky. But anyway, I just wanted to go over the tipping thing. I mean, because I do have strong feelings on it. But that actually, you know, I know is going to get a lot of you talking. But anyway, I'm going to pause here because I've got some other stuff to talk about, you know, food-wise. Alright? So hang on.